In the 2024 general election, Labour promised a great educational renewal, a fairer system, 6,500 new teachers, a war on inequality, financed by a bold fiscal raid on private education, VAT on school fees, they argued, would unblock billions for the 94% of pupils in state schools. Yet just months after taking office, about a year into the Labour government, the results are starting to come in, and they don't look like a victory. Instead, we're watching a slow-motion educational pile-up. Private schools are closing, pupil rolls are collapsing, teachers are vanishing, and manifesto pledges evaporating before the ink is even dry. From January 2025, private schools were forced to charge 20% VAT on fees. On top of this came the removal of business rate relief in April and an increase in employer national insurance. That's 3 additional fees that private schools now have to find. Together, these imposed a financial strain of around 50% more than schools were paying just 4 years ago, and all of this with knee-jerk speed. The consequences have been brutal. At least 22 independent schools have confirmed closure for the 2025 summer term, citing the VAT policy as the final straw. Schools like St Hilda's in Hertfordshire, St Joseph's in Burnley, Maidenhall in Northamptonshire, some over a century old, are shutting. Thousands of pupils are being displaced. Some head teachers like Royce Maguire of St Joseph's have called it the final nail in the coffin. Others, like the Cedars School in Greenock, have called it the straw that broke the camel's back. These aren't elite profit-churning institutions. Most are modest, community-focused schools operating on razor-thin margins. And contrary to the myth that independent education is reserved for oligarchs and bankers, many of the parents affected are simply middle-income earners who made sacrifices to give their children a different option, sometimes because they feel that their children respond better to smaller classrooms or to special SEND support that can be offered without all the paperwork which is required, the 2-year process which is required through the state system. The government insists that state schools have capacity to absorb the estimated 37,000 pupils expected to leave the private sector, but in reality, state school heads are already sounding the alarm. Some areas like Surrey and Cambridgeshire are seeing a flood of new applications. One study found over 3,000 former private pupils applied for state places between June and September 2024 alone. Class sizes are rising. SEND provision, already under strain, is becoming dangerously stretched. And here's the kicker. This policy, sold as a revenue raiser, may end up costing the state more per pupil in the long term, especially for children with special needs. As one Labour MP, Rupert Hook, admitted, it might make an elitist system more elitist. Labour's core promise was clear: use the money raised by VAT to hire 6,500 new teachers. It was repeated in speeches in the manifesto, even by the Chancellor herself. And let's see what's happened. This week, the first data under Labour showed not a rise, but a fall in teacher numbers, a net drop of 400 teachers. While secondary school staff saw a slight rise, this was wiped out by the loss of nearly 3,000 primary teachers. When questioned, Labour tried to wriggle out of its pledge by redefining it. The Times Educational Supplement asked whether the 6,500 teachers would still include primary teachers. The answer, no. Suddenly, schools and colleges means only some schools and some colleges. This is not just a U-turn, it's a confidence trick. And it gets worse. Labour also pledged to fully fund the employer national insurance hike for schools. They didn't. As a result, some schools were left shortchanged by up to 35% of expected funding. Add to that the underfunded pay rise for teachers, and schools are being forced to make redundancies. A survey by the NAHT shows half of heads are expecting to cut staff next year. So let's review. Private schools are closing. Pupils are flooding into a creaking state system. And far from hiring thousands of new teachers, we're actually losing the ones we have. This is a perfect storm, and it was entirely predictable. When you tax schools but offer no transitional support, you punish parents, you displace children, and you burden the state sector. The irony is that Labour's Educational Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, says she wants a quiet revolution, but there's nothing quiet about sacked teachers abandoned schools or displaced students. There's a reason the Independent Schools Council is taking the government to court. There's a reason head teachers across the country are meeting insolvency practitioners. This isn't just about VAT, it's about broken promises, tricksy accounting, and a refusal to admit that ideology, no matter how well-intentioned, must not override evidence. If education is to be the great engine of opportunity, then that engine is now coughing and spluttering. Labour must decide whether it wants to govern by slogans or govern with sense. Until then, I suppose schools will keep counting closures and broken manifesto promises, one term at a time, and students, pupils, will be inconvenienced, upset, displaced, and without the education which this Labour government has promised them.